Hello, everybody, and welcome to Winning in the Workplace. This is Maurice Velasquez, and we have a great show. Thank you guys for joining us. We do have a great show today. Today, I have in the studio with us Guy Barrone. He's the CEO of the Business Report, and we're going to be talking about something that's commonly known as facilitative leadership. But before I get too way ahead of myself, let me remind you, please find me at mauricetraining.com. You can also find me at winningintheworkplace.com. Mauricetraining.com is my website. Winning in the Workplace is my video library. You will find a treasure of great courses, lessons. All my podcasts are there. There's a lot of stuff that you can't find anywhere else in there. It's laid out in individual lessons, individual courses, as well as very in there as well. We have our management and movies series, and it's laid out in very orderly fashion. We have 2.5 hours courses. We have short sessions on there, and every month we're putting anywhere from 2 to 4 new segments. And if you get on our subscription list, you get notified. And look, it is well worth it. It's only $10 a month. You get 7 days free trial. So make sure you get out there at winningintheworkplace.com. All right. So like I mentioned to you earlier, I have in the studio with us Guy Barrone. I've known Guy for a couple of years, and we're going to be talking about facilitative leadership. And what is that? Ultimately, it's how to get feedback and input from teams on how to move things forward, how to move things in the right way. And if you know anything about what we do here at our company, is we work to align teams. We work to help executives, middle managers, frontliners get more aligned. It's what we call the alignment model, the alignment collaborative model. And basically, as you guys know, what it means is working with executives and middle managers and frontlines to all work very side by side in their respective roles and in their respective responsibilities. And we've dissected some of that already. We're going to be dissecting it much more in upcoming shows and in upcoming podcasts. And really, that's what our whole training program is about, is how to align these teams so they work very well together. Each one of them has its own responsibilities. They cross over, but ultimately, in order to help them focus, executives should focus, and they're more effective when they are focusing on vision, on items that speak to the vision, the direction of the company, the strategic goals, the KPIs. And when middle managers then take that and create game plans around that, when they create collaborative input from the different teams as to which direction they ought to go. So the middle managers they're stuck in no man's land. They get the vision, they get direction from the executives, and then they're responsible to organize that into game plans and into projects. And a lot of times that's where you begin to see the quagmire happen or the delays happen. That collaborative cooperation between departments becomes a really tough thing to find. But then let's add another layer of complexity, and that is getting input from the team members. I mean, ultimately, we know that that the best input comes from the teams. The executives have an insight about the direction of the company, where it should go. The managers have a different place in the journey, so they see things differently. They see the big picture of the executives, but they also see a lot of things closer to the ground, so they have an advantage that the executives don't have. But the executives can see further because of where they are, not only in conversations, but in the position of the company. And yet, the frontliners and the frontline managers, then the frontline team members, they're closer to where the action happens. I hate to say they're closer to the bottom, but I don't really mean that in any negative way. They're closer to where the action is. They're in the front lines. They're with the client. They're with the customer. They understand how things are and how things aren't in a way that middle managers can see that from a distance, not as close as the frontliners themselves. So when it comes to having the middle managers organize, there's an element in which the managers have to be able to go and ask and have to be able to tap into the frontliners and say, hey, what do y'all think? Okay, we're trying to go a certain direction. What do you guys think? All right. And therein lies where a lot of the challenges are for companies, for managers, because oftentimes the feedback is very hard to ascertain. It's very difficult to collect that. Oftentimes we don't give the teams enough room and enough time to get that. So if it feels rushed, it becomes really hard to get, I guess you would say, honest feedback as opposed to rushed feedback. Everybody kind of, feeling like we have an idea where they want us to say, so we'll just say it because they want feedback by tomorrow. And so, and then they just give us kind of superficial or not really substantial feedback. So getting feedback from teams on a project by project basis or as needed is a must. It has to happen, but it doesn't happen easily. And so there's got to be a way in which we do this. And there is a way. It's called facilitative leadership. I am so thankful that there's a term for it out there. I've had the pleasure of being in some of these. I've had the pleasure of facilitating some of these. And I've had the pleasure of honestly seeing a subject matter expert see this in live action, and that's Guy. Okay. So one of the reasons why we need to do this is because what the frontliners are facing is an incredible amount of problems in the front lines. Now, those problems could come from within the department. They could come from another department. They could come from clients, the customers, or perhaps changing things within the culture or the procedure. All those are problems. And if we don't address those problems or we don't get input about those problems, then what happens is those issues become quagmire down there. And if those stay down there for a long period of time, the team members become very frustrated. The team members become very accustomed to the fact that, look, nothing's going to change around here. And they're asking us to give their input. Really, we gave input 8 months ago. We gave input 7 months ago. We filled out an employee survey. Nothing's done about it. And they're wanting us to get into a room and do what? And so they're just simply accustomed to the problems existing in there. So we have to find a way to get those problems to be communicated up and then determine how to problem solve. And the responsibility of the managers is to set this up. And of course, throughout the whole time, we have to be able to report and give a progress update, not only to the executives, but everybody involved. So this cycle, this alignment model, okay, is essential. It's essential to an organization, but how do we get that input? The alternative, however, is a problem. The alternative usually, unfortunately, looks something like this, where two individuals talk about a project. Let's say this partner talks to an IT manager. That IT manager is really excited about implementing it. They're going to change a module for the front desk, but then they go talk to another supervisor over here. Then this supervisor here. Now, for those of you that are not able to watch what I'm showing on the screen, I'm showing a diagram of just what's called triangulation, where people go around each other trying to implement, but they're not doing it in an organized fashion. Okay. So if you want to see the diagram and you want to see the slideshow, please watch the video version on it when we publish it after this. For those of you that are able to watch it, then certainly enjoy it. And those that are right now listening to this on audio, then I'll try to describe it a little more. But right now, where we had the scenario was that the supervisor then went and talked to another peer in another department. That department supervisor then talked to perhaps the intake manager, who might be needing to know, but they don't have a really good relationship. But the intake department then goes talk to a partner. And then that other partner is now does not want to talk to the second partner or the owner or they're involved. And eventually, while all these conversations are happening, then somebody eventually does tell the front desk department that, look, we're going to implement this. Lo and behold, no sooner have they told that person, within 2 hours later, the IT team implements it, and the front desk department is simply going, and why couldn't somebody have told me this before? That level of triangulation is very common. It's very common in the workplace, and we have to get out of that. But the first step is, how do we get feedback as to how the problem should be addressed? What are the things that we should be doing to address this problem? What are the things that we should be tackling in this? So that's the nature of where facilitative leadership comes in, and ask the questions: can we get together and do this organized fashion, in an organized way? All right. So that being the case, let me, as I've been telling you, I have a subject matter expert, a great friend, a great colleague in the studio with us. Guy, you there? Come on in, Guy.
Hey, Maurice, how are you?
Hey, man. So how crazy am I? I mean, did I exaggerate the problem?
Well, Maurice, you want me to come on this show and disagree with Maurice, the management guru? I'm not going to do that.
Oh, man, I appreciate that. But listen, I thought I was getting the guru to come on board. So everybody's sitting watching us and, man, these guys are just fluffing. These guys are just blowing smoke. No, man, it's great to work with you, Guy. I appreciate it. And so look, I've done this for many years, but I've watched you do it, and I appreciate the fact that you have a really good handle on how to do it, the methods, the steps, the history behind it.
It's all this gray hair that comes with that experience.
Well, I was going to say, man, the coloring looks great. You know, the coloring. I hope mine did too. You know, so.
All right. Well, let me get back to the subject matter here. I think you made some great points. I've been through your training; it's fantastic. I really think that when trying to get input, that's really the key.
That's really the case, correct?
How can get input? People lose confidence about providing input because they think nothing's going to be done as a result of that input, or they feel like if I give my true opinion on something that I may get in trouble as a result of giving that opinion. Correct. So that's all part of facilitative leadership and some of the skills that you have to develop in order to make this thing work. But let me tell you about a little story that just recently happened here at Malaria Enterprises, Business Report, et cetera. Sure. We had some input from our staff, and one very small piece of input that I received. I do a bunch of different things. I think we'll talk about that in a little bit. But one little piece of input was that our water cooler was too far down to the ground. It was hard to access the water coming out of the water cooler. Sounds like something really silly, right?
Yeah, it sounds silly. It sounds silly, but I want to hear it. Go ahead.
Very silly. It sounds. Nonetheless, based on experience, I knew that this was a very visible issue, even though it didn't seem like a major issue for our company, but it's a visible issue. That could
a lot of executives, when they hear of problems like that, a lot of managers go, "Oh, really? Is that what we're worried about?" And they downplay it, but it's not downplaying when it's affecting their day-to-day life. Go ahead.
Exactly. Well, nonetheless, it was very difficult to find a stand to put this thing on, but we found one, and I had it put on. And as a result, now the water cooler is actually at a higher level that if you're at normal height, that it's easy to access. I got at least 7 people that came into my office, and this doesn't happen every day, I can promise you. 7 people that came in my office said, "Thank you for raising the height of the water cooler," which I thought was hilarious.
Right.
Nonetheless, it just shows you that the correlation there of someone giving input that was visible and a reaction to that or an action as a result of that input, and how much it meant to at least 7 people here at our office. So those little things do matter, and that builds confidence in the next time we ask for input, regardless of what it may be, that we will get some additional input that, hey, there's a correlation there. Now, that's just one example. We do a lot of things that people visibly see how we use their input. But
no, so
little things do matter.
One time I heard a professor say, sometimes chasing the rabbit is the point. Okay. So if you don't mind, let's chase that rabbit just for a second. Okay. Because I think there's a really key point here, and that is that low-hanging fruit issues that to executives and upper management seems to be a bother. By not fixing those things, we're missing a great opportunity to build camaraderie, appreciation, buy-in, and the framework from which to continue ongoing service to our employees and feedback from them. Because if they're comfortable telling you about something so minuscule and granular and what could otherwise be considered a pain of an issue like the water cooler, and yet you fixed it. You saw it as a low-hanging fruit that could be done. How much capital and how much capital did you invest in their emotional loyalty to you and the fact that you have your ear to the ground and are producing an environment where problems can be solved? I mean, isn't that really what we're trying to build?
Yeah, it's building trust, essentially, that the input's important. Now, not to say that we're not going to use every piece of input that comes. And
Right.
a lot of things may fall off to the wayside. I like to use the analogy of an airport. You know, some planes are ready to land, some ideas are ready to be used, and other ideas are still circling or not ready to land yet. So I think if we frame it in that way, I think it's a little more appealing to someone who gives their input and feels like, hey, we need to do this. Well, essentially, no, that's not what we need to do right this minute, but thank you for the input. And at some point down the road, that might be something that we end up doing. That happens all the time.
That's great. No, I love it.
I was in a meeting this week where a piece of input had been given about a year ago. And we discussed some other issues that were up, and that piece came back up to the top. And lo and behold, it's something that we're going to act on now.
So the way I've heard you train this and the way you and I have talked about it in whenever we're doing coaching together, but I'd like you to tease this out and dissect this a little more. There has to be a culture of ongoing input, but there's also has to be times and seasons in which we pause to get input in a structured manner. Is that correct?
Correct. I mean, again, I guess it's the culture, the preference of the organization and how they collect that. But there has to be an ongoing method of collection of that input. Now, when you take on a task through the facilitative leadership approach that we're going to talk about, I think it's important to have just a finite method of how you're going to collect that information.
Let's dive in. But wait, I haven't even introduced you, man. I mean, I'm sorry. I know we jumped into it. I apologize, but I don't know. It's really good to interact with you on these things. So, guys, this is Guy. As you can tell, even if we both had to stop right now, you guys would probably hopefully have gotten some gems out of what we've discussed. Guy is the COO of Malaria Enterprises, who is the publishing house for, is it 5 magazines, correct? The Business Report, In the Register.
We publish a bunch, I can tell you that.
Publish a bunch, yeah. No, it's great. And you've been with Malaria for 2-3 years, is that correct?
For 2 years. This summer will be 2 years, that's right.
Okay. And
we also do leadership training, as you know, because you
and I. Yeah, that's right.
We also have Studio E, which is our video and ad agency type operation. Does a great job there as well. So we're a multimedia company.
That's great. All right. So tell us a little bit about your history, where you've been, and then let's dive into leadership.
I'm a Tiger originally. Came up to go to LSU, finished in finance, and then went on to work for Dow Chemical here in Louisiana for about 10 years, actually in public affairs, believe it or not.
Oh, okay.
Then from there, went to a small business as the president and CEO of a small manufacturing company that distributed its product around the world. So got a lot of experience with that. And then from there, I've moved on to Malaria here in the last couple of years. Loved every second of the job. Not because Julio's watching this broadcast, but because that's the true story. I really enjoyed my time here in the last 2 years. We have a great staff, wonderful people to work with, and it's just fun to come to work every day.
And so I think I'm losing count, and I'm kind of glad of the number of times you and I have been able to co-present. I think we're on number 4 and number 5, right?
Yeah, I think you've saved me several times. So.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. But no, it's really great. All right, so let's dive into it. What is facilitative leadership? And let's start with that, and then let's use that as a springboard. What is facilitative leadership?
Well, this is something that really I've formulated over time. It exists. Okay,
it exists. It's out there. It's the same term.
You can go to AI, and it'll give you a great definition of facilitative leadership. But I've kind of put my hands around it over the past 30 years. Really starting to work with Dow, it started to formulate this process, steps that you take in order to bring a group of folks, whether that's a team at your office, whether it's a nonprofit board, whether that's your civic association, could be almost any entity, and move them forward in a direction together. So
Correct.
you
Okay,
get
good.
the benefit of the input of the entire group, that your team at the office, your department, you get the benefit of their input. And then as a result of the process that you take together, you create ownership in the direction that you're going. And as a result of that, you have a pile of people that are pulling the wagon in the same direction, going to achieve a goal, going to achieve a mission, a vision, going to achieve an assignment, whatever the case may be. You're moving the entire organization and you're benefiting from the input of that entire organization in the certain direction that you're going. So,
Right, so
that's essentially, that's probably a roundabout way to describe facilitative leadership.
It's a mechanism by which to collect input, right? And then help to take that input and formulate it into a more organized approach to projects and to assigning tasks and getting getting the buy-in because they had input into it.
Right. It's essentially that you've described it. But
okay.
I think we fall a little bit short if we say it's just getting input and going in a direction. It's actually moving a group together in a direction.
So would you say through the whole process is the facilitation of it is throughout the whole process, not just the front end side of collecting the input?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. The entire process is a facilitation.
Got it. Good. All right. That's good clarity. Good clarity.
We could talk about some of the steps, and I think, that's where the devil's in the details here as far as how this is do
Sure,
no, get a little bit more clarity as far as
absolutely.
this process and what happens.
Okay, so what would you say are the steps that we need to?
Well, number one, the number one step is to identify the target. What are you trying to achieve? And I think it's important for whatever group that you're working with that they all understand what you're trying to achieve. Because many times you'll have a group of folks that are working on something, have been assigned something, and if you ask them individually, what does this mean? What does success look like? They're all kind of moving in different directions as far as how they define what success looks like. So you may be given an objective, you may be giving an assignment, but if it's not very specific, it could be going in different directions. So number one is make sure you well define the target.
So let me give you an example.
What's the finish line?
Would a target be something like we're needing to expand into the New Orleans area and we need to open up 2 offices and then consider moving into the South, Mississippi? And is that a target?
That's pretty specific. If you're given that assignment, you pretty much know that it's a series of steps that you have to take. So
that's too defined. Your target is a little broader, a little more big picture. To give me an example of
I would say, in my opinion, certainly you could use that as part of facilitative leadership and use the principles for that. But I would say that if the assignment is to expand your sales into a new market, into the New Orleans market, and achieve X percentage of sales increase as a result of that expansion.
Got it.
X percentage of market share, or whatever the case may be, that would be a good way to frame an assignment under facilitative leadership. And then you start to talk more in terms of what data do you have to collect in order to make that happen. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but what's involved in making that happen, essentially.
All right. So who normally generates the target? Who comes up with the target?
Well, it could be the leader of the organization, it could be the CEO, it could be the board of directors, it could be your boss. It could be it's the mission and vision of a particular nonprofit organization. How do we realize that mission and vision? So really, typically, from a leadership standpoint, if that's kind of what you're driving at here, it's typically on the leadership level. They create the target for you.
Got it. Okay. All right. Keep going. All right. So the first thing is defining a target and announcing the target.
Once you understand what that target is, it's well defined. It's understood that represents the finish line. Once we deliver this, we've reached the finish line. The next step is understanding who the stakeholders are. Who's impacted by this? And oftentimes in a project or things that we undertake, we are short-sighted in who we believe can help us get across that finish line. And many times, a lot of people are impacted by what we do, and we just don't think in terms of who is impacted by or potentially impacted by what we need to go make happen. So I think more of a 360 thinking in all of the stakeholders that are involved. For example, getting back to your example.
Dissect that just a little more. 360, like give me an example.
For example, if you're talking about, let's go back to your example of moving into the New Orleans market. Okay, who are the folks that are impacted by this? Well, certainly your immediate team is impacted. Certainly the leadership of your organization is impacted. Certainly the vendors that supply your company, they're all impacted. Your potential customers and existing customers, they could be impacted by this as well. There's so many folks that you have, the neighbors, certainly the market itself that you're moving into. There's so many different people and entities that you have to consider. And how do you gather, once you've identified those, and again, I'm getting ahead of myself here as well, but once you've identified those potential stakeholders, how do you get input from them? How do you get buy-in from them? And so that's why it's important to identify those stakeholders.
So let's role play. Let's say that you're in the executive team and I'm a department manager, and you explain to me, look, you explain to me the target. Then my stakeholders would more than likely be my team, right? My immediate team.
That would be one stakeholder group for sure.
Okay, and then other stakeholders, you would in this scenario that I'm creating in our role play, you would go to other stakeholders or other department managers and get input from over there. Expand a little bit on that.
Are you in charge of this? Am I assigning you something here? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes. I'm a department manager. I have 15 people, and so I'm trying to understand, would my 15 people be that team of stakeholders that I'm going to go try to get input from?
They would be one stakeholder group.
Got it. Okay.
Stakeholder group would be other departments within your organization, maybe other leadership of other departments within your organization, maybe vendors that supply your department that would be impacted by whatever you've been assigned to go do, and maybe potential customers, existing and potential customers that are stakeholder groups. If it's a physical location, it might be your neighbors that you're going to impact as a result of the location. Could be governmental entities that are impacted by this as well. They may be a stakeholder group. Again, you need to think broadly. Think broadly in terms of who's going to impact the success or failure of your initiative here.
Perfect.
Oftentimes, so target. We're narrow in our thinking as far as who's involved in trying to help us get across the finish line.
Oftentimes, when we want to get input, it's very rushed. We don't take the time out to figure out. I think I see a lot of companies try to figure out the target, but when it comes to the stakeholders, at that point it's very loose and it's very, y'all could just go get input. It's very random, as opposed to what I'm hearing you say is let's take a little more of an intentional approach and let's figure out who the stakeholders are, and then let's organize that. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I mean, number one is identifying the stakeholders. Then we'll talk about how we get data from them in the future. But it could be an association that we're involved in. It could be all kinds of different stakeholders that are involved in this thing. But the beauty of this is the more folks that we involve, ultimately and potentially, those folks are actually helping you get across that finish line. And so to identify those people up front, number one, you're going to end up with a better product because you're getting more input. Things maybe you didn't even consider because other stakeholders are inputting into your process. And number two, because of the diversity there, you probably have better input as a result.
Okay, so let me pause here and let me give some information to our participants. This podcast is most of the time live. Sometimes, as in this case, we sometimes have to pre-record it. So what you're watching here in this conversation is a pre-recorded conversation the guy and I had several days before this live version. You're probably watching this on a Friday, but we've already recorded it. So, however, If you have any questions, I'd like to invite you to go ahead and post them on this chat, because one of our producers is behind the scenes running this, collecting the information, and go ahead and include perhaps an email or a phone number that we can reply back to, and they will send them to us, and then Guy and I will reply back to either the whole team or to you. So please don't hesitate in asking questions, or if you want to send us individual questions, please feel free to do so. You can reach me at Maurice@teammirrorworld.com. Guy, what's your email address that folks
It's guy@businessreport.com.
Okay. All right, so good. So we have the first two steps, the target and the stakeholders. Where do we go after that?
Well, next step, now that you have your stakeholders, let's try to identify what inputs you need in order to get all the information that you need in order to make a good decision, to set a good plan in place in the direction that you want to move into. And so one of the first steps is to take your stakeholders and understand what information you can gather from them and how to gather information from them. It could be that you interview these folks. It could be that you survey these folks. It could be various means and ways in order to get the information, the input from your different stakeholder groups. But it's important for you to identify those stakeholders, number one, and then secondly, understand how you get input from them. What's the most efficient way for you to get input from them? So
gathering the information, we can use different methods. Is that correct?
Correct.
Right, so I want to show a picture here of you in action. Okay, I happen to be one of the pictures holding the Cokes and the Dr. Peppers. But no. All right. So tell us what we're seeing here, especially for our audience who's on audio and not video.
Well,
what are we seeing here?
We're seeing a bunch here. Essentially, this was an exercise to show how this system works. And of course, we took a few shortcuts in the process, but essentially these are all, you see a bunch of small pieces of paper that are posted up on the wall. And each of those represents an idea in order to solve a particular problem. In this case, we were talking about crime. Preventing crime in the Baton Rouge area. How would we go about solving the crime problem in Baton Rouge? And so what we asked, we asked the participants in this particular training to give us their ideas. There's some very finite ways to make that happen so it doesn't get out of control, but nonetheless, we won't go into a lot of detail there. But this method is meta planning. It's one little tactic or method to use within the facilitative leadership approach, but it's not necessarily the only one that you need to use in order to capture ideas.
Would you say, perhaps, when you said earlier surveys or interviews, I've used all those. I particularly enjoy the meta plan, the sticky notes.
One method that I've used, and we'll get to the actual group that you choose to do the planning for you, but one method that I've used is gather that information, whether it's studies that are available, whether it's input from leadership through interviews, whether it's input from your staff, depending on, again, regardless of where they are within the organization. All that information is presented to a group, and then in turn, that group then presents that information onto that wall in different pieces. It's categorized, it's grouped, and then we get into themes. So again, we'll get a little bit further down in the process, but there are various methods and means of collection of the information. I think the important thing for us to understand is we do a great job of understanding who's impacted by this from a stakeholder standpoint, and then we do a great job of collecting the information that's available relevant to what we're trying to accomplish.
All right. So number one, target. Number two, stakeholders. Number three is to actually get the input.
Gathering the information.
Gathering the information. All right. So then what's step number four?
Well, once you have the information, you probably have a bunch of it, right?
Yeah.
So you've got to, in some way, shape, or form, put it in what I call themes. Essentially, once you gathered your information, you have a group. You would select a group. Typically, it is your team that you're working with that will then understand all of this information, consume all this information, along with their abilities, with their skill set, with their history, with their education. They will take all of this information, and then from there, you get to the point of where we talked about that meta planning. Essentially, you're presenting ideas multiple ideas in order to solve the problem. In order,
I find that probably this step is the most difficult one to get to, in that getting the input is not as difficult, but in comparison, that when the data comes in, when the input comes in, for that group to then organize it into what you call themes or groupings, that's very difficult. I mean, and if it takes a long time, it tends to delay everything. But what's been your experience about, just, you got to make sure this does not lag and this doesn't just stay, because months go by and it just won't go anywhere.
Well, my recommendation is take the Maurice class on grouping, because Maurice does a good job of that.
No,
essentially what you're doing is you're looking at the input, you're looking at the data, and you're trying to just basically putting into common themes. Are they just it doesn't have to be the exact same thing, but is the issue in a relative area? Is it a themed area? You're trying to kind of capture everything into one themed area, then move on to the next theme that you're capturing. It's funny, data is so powerful. These themes will pop out to you. You'll actually.
So I'm the department manager. I get this info. Other departments are speaking. That group has to be able to group these in such a way to where we can find common ideas, common themes, and just
exactly
let the data itself give direction to how you group them.
Exactly.
Exactly. You're that group that's doing this interpreting is trying to keep their own bias out of it. They're letting what they found be what dictates, and there has to be some interpretive mechanism going in. But what you're looking for is commonality, right? You're looking
yeah, and it doesn't have to be the exact same. I mean, actually, there will be some similarity from the exact same input that you'll get, but at the same time, again, if it's in that area,
got it. Okay,
you want to group it in together. And so once you've grouped everything into the different groups, and maybe you have 5 groups, maybe you have 10 groups, maybe you have 12 groups, who knows what the data tells you to do. At that point, then those themes can be converted to objectives. You can actually turn those themes into a specific objective that basically says, what is this data telling me to go do? Essentially, if I read all of these within this particular area, within this particular theme, what is that data specifically telling me to go do? And you capture those thoughts into one objective.
That's great. That's great. Okay.
Yeah, you might have 5 or 12 objectives that pop out as a result of it.
All right. So it feels like we're getting closer and closer down to the action items, and so I see the importance of just having the letting the process work its way down. If you skip the objectives, you're going to hurt. It's kind of like skipping third base and trying to score a run, right? Sorry, it usually doesn't work that way.
Yeah. Essentially, what you're saying is, once you have these objectives, if I go out and I achieve each of these objectives, will I reach the target?
Got it.
That's really where you're trying to get to. And if you look at those objectives and you objectively say, okay, if I achieve all these objectives and I don't reach and I'm not going to reach the target, then you've got a problem at that point. You've got a process check for you.
That's great. That's great. All right, let's
nonetheless, typically, if you achieve those objectives, you will reach the target.
Okay. All right. So then target stakeholders, you collect the input, you group your themes, and you identify the objectives. What's the next step?
Well, then you have action steps. Essentially, what are the things, the steps that we need to take in order to achieve that specific objective, those different objectives? What are those different?
And that means by departments, by individuals, by how.
Well, that's a great point. That's a great point. You can assign work groups for each of those objectives in order to manage that objective, to determine those action steps. They can draw from the general input that's been given as well. So again, they're going to be in charge of reaching that objective. Tell me how you're going to get there. What are the steps you're going to take in order to get there? And the overall planning group that you started out with can oversee that process as well.
And then, am I missing any? Is there any other step ups there? Because at this point,
we're skating along here, but there's
yeah.
some little things here and there that we could make it a little bit more robust.
Yeah, when you asked me how much to cover, I said let's just cover the high level major steps, because there's a lot of steps in between of how to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And you have the templates, you have the whole step by step more in a guide. Mm-hmm. But at this point, that everyone now has. Could we consider that to be the game plan?
Right.
Roll out the game plan, and then we can execute it, amend it, change it. But now we have something to work from in a unified manner.
Correct.
Yes?
You've got an action list for each objective, and you're essentially going out and you're executing that action list to achieve the objective.
All right. So let me ask you this: Do you normally do this on a holistic approach, like we have to work on our strategic plans, therefore it's got to be everything we're going to try to do for the next 2 years? Do you ever use this on a project by project? In other words, we have to work on a particular project, we've got to create a project, let's use this method to get it going in an organized manner. Do you find yourself doing it in both, or is it more geared towards one or the other?
All of the above. And again, you can scale it up or scale it down depending on the size of the project or the assignment or the target. But all of the above. There may be some components, some things that you kind of shortcut as a result of the nature of the assignment of the target. But what I just described to you is more of a larger organizational type effort that you undertake to develop a strategic plan.
I know you have a guide, you have basically a workbook, you have all the steps. If a team is listening and saying, look, I got to learn how to do this, I got to teach my managers how to do this, what could they look forward to? They contact you, they contact me, and they say, but hey, Guy, look, what are we talking about? How, like, if we were to train 15 managers with the executive, or 15 people, leaders, what would that look like in terms of coming in and doing it? Is it in person? Is it 3 hours, 6 days? What are we talking about?
Typically, when I teach this class in our leadership training, it takes about 4 hours for us to do. So if there's a group out there that would like to teach this method, I could do that in 4 hours or so, and certainly continue to work with that group to counsel them as they move forward. With your help, last time I did this for a training session, we developed this guide, step-by-step guide, which I think is a big help, and gives you some templates as well as some examples of each of the steps and how to move down on each of those steps.
So if I'm watching this video, I'm listening to this recording, all of a sudden I want to get my hands on that thing, right? So what we would tell folks is get your hands on that thing, contact guys, set up the training, and the guide is the training. And or if you want Guy to coach you through it or whatever, really they just need to contact you, right?
Yeah, Maurice, I've done this over 100 times. I've done it for folks like Dow, like St. Vincent de Paul, other for-profit companies, other non-profit companies, small departments, overall entities. So as I said, I've done this thing over 30 years, and knock on wood, yet to fail.
No, that's great. That's great. Guy, let's go ahead and land it. Any other thoughts? Anything that you feel we haven't said that we should say, or any type, tips or insights?
Well, we covered a lot of ground today. I think there's a lot more detail that goes into what we talked about. But I think if you understand, again, you're trying to move an entire organization together, have them motivated, have them feel that they're invested, they feel ownership, that they feel accomplishment once it's done, and they're ready to do the next assignment as a result of their success. This is a method that works. It just flat works.
Yeah. Without a doubt. I've done this for about 8 years, and it wasn't until really you and I started doing it, I watched you do it, that I realized, man, this is just so, first of all, effective, intentional, it's organized. And then, you told me look it up, and man, it's a thing out there, right? So it's like, well, la-di-da.
I will say, Maurice, we eat our own cooking here. We've used it internally.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
in fact, we've got 10 work groups right now that are working on our objectives. And
You mean you guys there at Malaria, you guys are using this?
correct.
At what step are you guys at in the process?
We're executing objectives right now.
Okay, so you've already gone. You're now in execution, and have you had to come back and adjust and bring everybody back? Have you gone through one of those steps?
Well, that's one of those details that we've kind of glossed over.
Got it. Well, let's make that a future podcast.
Nonetheless, yes, it's an ongoing process, because as you work these action lists, you may discover that there are other things that you need to go do within trying to achieve that objective.
All right. So everybody.
I'll say one more thing. The beauty of this is once you begin to work towards these objectives, all kinds of great things start to pop out. So you may have, for example, we've compiled a process book here at Malaria. Every process that we have within our company has been compiled so we can eliminate duplication, we can increase efficiency, and we can determine which processes we don't have that we need to have within our system.
All right. So the developing of that booklet, okay, has that been as an outcome of having started this process, and you've identified that we need to develop this, and that came out of this?
That was one action item from one work group of the 10 that we talked about, just one action item. And I'll be honest with you, the group that worked on this, I was the chair of that particular group. They were running so much faster than I could keep up because they were so excited about this. The entire group was so motivated. Awesome. One came to me the next day and said, look, I stayed up till midnight last night, and because I was so excited about trying to compile this and get it in good order.
All right. How many people do you have total in your organization?
We have about 60 in our entire organization.
So is everybody involved in this at some point, and everyone's doing something related to this? Everyone's
involved from the standpoint they've given input. I would say that probably 2/3 of our organization is actually actively working on a work group.
All right, so you have 60 plus people, everybody participated, and 2/3 have received projects and tasks that you're on an ongoing basis. Everyone's executing it.
Part of a work group executing.
Okay, so the importance of this, I mean, I know you and I see it, and I trust that a lot of our audience is catching this. In order for us to accomplish comprehensive cultural alignment, which is what my program is all about, at the very core, managers have to learn how to do facilitative leadership, to do what you're doing and bringing everybody together, keeping everybody on the same page, everybody moving in the right direction. And within that same process, you can edit and adjust it as you go and as needed. I mean, to me, that's complete alignment. It doesn't mean perfection. It just means you have everybody operating as a unit, even though there's different departments, different groups. Everyone knows what everyone's working on, and everyone knows what the goals, objectives, and the accomplishment. I like what you often say, everyone knows what success is. That's alignment.
We've all defined success, but the beauty of this is investment, individual investment.
Okay.
And I'm talking about on a personal level and ownership on a personal level. I don't own one lick of stock, but I feel invested in the business as a result of my participation in this direction.
So by doing this, you've raised everybody's leadership stock a whole lot more. Everyone's learning skills that aren't theoretical. It's real life. They're seeing it, and every time they work on their individual projects, they know that it's connected to the mission, vision, values, objectives, and directions of the company. Everyone's learning this, right? All in one big swoop by doing it together in an organized, intentional manner.
Absolutely.
All right, guys, yet another reason why you need to contact Guy. Contact Guy, get him into your teams, do at least a Zoom session to help him tailor, dissect, and then figure out with him how he can help your team. I love it. I've seen you do it. I highly promote you. You're an expert at this. I love watching you do it. And the proof is in the pudding. What you're doing there at Malaria with 60 plus people is really enviable. And that's what people need to see. They need to see it in action. Guy, thank you. Give us again your contact information. How do we get a hold of you?
Yeah, best way to reach me would be guy@businessreport.com.
Okay, wonderful. All right. So guys, thank you very much. This is Winning in the Workplace. Don't forget my URLs are mauricetraining.com. My video library is winningintheworkplace.com. And you will also find the management and movie series in that library. So do not hesitate. Do not think twice about it. Go in there, use the 7-day free trial, enjoy it. It's very expensive. It's only $10 a month after that. And really just take advantage and enjoy it. Guy, thank you very much for joining us. Everybody, please be back next week, next Friday, here at the same place. And we really look forward to seeing you guys next week.